Before we leave Matthew chapter 5 and move on into chapter 6, just a couple more things that I wanted to say about Jesus' admonition that his followers are not to kill, and his followers, in fact, are to love all others, including our enemies. To follow Jesus means that we are willing to die, but we're not willing to kill. That makes me about as pro-life as you could possibly be. Brings up a lot of contemporary societal issues. One of those is abortion. Now, I'm male. Abortion can never affect me personally. I therefore don't think I have any right to tell any woman what she should or should not do in a situation that is one of those situations that, because of my maleness, I can never be in. It's very easy for someone, for example, who is too old to be ever sent to war to tell young people that they need to go to war. And it's awfully easy for men to tell women, and throughout history, men are used to telling women how to do things. It's easy for a man to tell a woman what her opinion on abortion ought to be. Secondly, we live in a pluralistic society. The United States of America is not a Christian nation. It never was a Christian nation. It was not founded on Christian principles. It was founded on Enlightenment principles. Some of the people who were amongst its founders were godly Christian people. Others were, like Thomas Jefferson, were deists who believed in a distant God that never in any way connects with us or creation, a God who never works miracles of any kind. Amongst our founding fathers, there were people who denied the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. There were members of other religions like Rosicrucians, for example. Benjamin Franklin was a Rosicrucian. Now, this nation was built on the principles that came out of the philosophic movement called the Enlightenment, not upon Christian principles. And at any rate, the United States of America, actually all of North America, this includes Canada too, these are pluralistic nations. There are people here of all different kinds of faith and people of no faith. And as a Christian, it is not my proper place to try to legally coerce people to follow in what I believe based on my Christian beliefs. So I am opposed to legislating laws outlawing abortion. But I am personally very much opposed to abortion. I believe that logically, human life, begins at conception. I can't prove that. I can't prove at what point a developing person becomes a person because a soul is infused with a group of cells. I don't know that. But logically, I don't see where you could draw the line. Maybe when the can detect a heartbeat, I don't know. I know that some abortions are medically necessary, and I respect that. And I know many women who have had abortions, and I respect them. I don't think God condemns them or hates them, but I'm very much saddened by the fact that so many babies are destroyed in utero in North America on a day-by-day basis. Many of them simply because the pregnancy is inconvenient. I wish that Christian groups, people of faith, would do far more than just oppose abortion. I wish they would work to alleviate the poverty that forces many people to make that choice. I wish that they would work to support women and of all ages, childbearing age. I wish that they would care for orphans, more so than we do. I wish that the whole adoption process was streamlined and that good homes could be found for every baby that is carried to term, but whose mother doesn't feel like she's in a place to be able to provide for that child. So I am pro-life. I'm opposed to abortion, but I don't coerce and I don't force that view on anyone else. But I am very strongly pro-life when it comes to abortion. Secondly, the exhortation by Jesus to not kill applies to euthanasia. Now, I've worked as a hospice chaplain. I'm currently a hospital chaplain. Excuse me just a second, my neighbor is mowing the lawn. I want to close the window to shut out the noise. There, that's better. Pardon me. Um, I've worked as I am a hospital chaplain, uh, board certified hospital chaplain, endorsed for chaplaincy by my denomination. I spent, I don't know, 7, 8 years as a hospice chaplain, specifically working with people in end of life situation, visiting them in their homes and long-term care facilities and inpatient units. I worked for the second oldest hospice in the United States, and um, that hospice is the largest in this region. I live in the Cincinnati area, and it's the only nonprofit hospice in this area, and it provides wonderful services that help people end their lives with dignity. If you're looking for a good hospice, Hospice of Cincinnati is as good as they get. And in that capacity as a chaplain, I've seen many people who are physically suffering greatly. Now, normally, the doctors and nurses associated with hospice can bring the pain under control, and the vast majority of people can therefore live relatively pain-free and um, die in a gentle, peaceful kind of way. In most instances, probably 90%, in their own homes, surrounded by their loved ones. And that's what hospice is all about as a program, is enabling that. Because that's what most people would want. But there are some people, and I've seen this both in hospice and in the hospital, who die horrendous deaths, experiencing great pain, great suffering, that um, the physicians are and nurses are not able, for whatever reason, to bring under control. Now, any pain can be controlled if you use uh, enough medication to essentially make the person unconscious. Um, but prior to that, barring that, some people, not most, but in our modern culture, but some people um, face really debilitating, horrible deaths. I think particularly of people with um, ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, which leaves the mind intact but takes away the ability of the body to move, to talk, to do anything. And so I have sympathy for those who say, wouldn't it be the most humane thing to do just to give this person the option, if they want it, to take a pill which will end their lives? And some of our states do exactly that. And it's interesting that in Oregon, which is one of those states, um, the euthanasia procedure is set up very carefully, as I understand it. Uh, the person has to be screened carefully. They are terminally ill. Um, there's no question about that. They are facing uh, debilitating, painful death. The person undergoes psychological counseling with family members, and then assuming they're rational, they're in their right minds, they can make that decision for themselves, then the physician will write a prescription for a drug which will end the person's life. 60% of the people, last I heard, never fill that prescription. 60% of those who get it never fill it. Apparently, just having the option gives them a sense of control and therefore an ability to bear the suffering. Because most of the time, or at least a lot of the time, the suffering that the person fears is greater than the suffering that actually occurs. Again, because hospice doctors and nurses are very good at relieving suffering and pain, and they never do anything in hospice to hasten death, and they never do anything in hospice that's unnecessary to try to cure something that can't be cured. It's just going to make the person miserable. Some of the interventions, in medicine, just because we can do it doesn't mean we should do it. We wind up perhaps giving a person another week or two of life, but it's a horrible week or two of life. And what's the point? Especially for a believer, if God's calling you, then go home, be with the Lord. So I understand the desire for the option of euthanasia. I don't condemn those who have that view. I've heard people say we treat animals better than we do people. When our dog is old and sick and in constant pain and there's nothing you can do about it, we gently put them to sleep. Why not do that for people? Well, because I am pro-life and because of Jesus' prohibition against killing, I don't feel that I have to do anything to prolong life. But on the other hand, I can't do anything that would purposely shorten life either. I have to leave that in God's hands. So again, without being judgmental, I'm not only pro-life when it comes to abortion, I'm also pro-life when it comes to the question of euthanasia. A third area where I think this applies in our lives, by this I mean Jesus teaching that we are not to kill, but instead we are to love. This third area is capital punishment. Now I know capital punishment was common in the Old Testament. It even on the surface seems like it's something that is commanded by God in the Old Testament. But remember that God, in the Old Testament especially, is accommodating people for where they are. He does not approve, but he permits slavery. He does not approve of, but he permits polygamy. He does not approve of Israel having a king, but when they insist on having a king, he gives them a king. So we have the principle of accommodation, and capital punishment falls into that. It's something that all the ancient Near Eastern cultures were doing, and so it's something that God accommodates, but it is not his will. People object and they say, well, Paul said, if I'm done anything worthy of death, I don't object to being put to death. Well, Paul's not saying that's God's will. Paul is saying that that's what Rome does. Rome puts people to death. The Roman Empire put tons of people to death. Innocent people like Paul, and guilty people as well. So Paul is saying, look, I know I live under this system. But when we follow the red letters, the teachings of Jesus, which in some of our Bibles are printed in red letters, when we put those first, specifically when we put this Sermon on the Mount first in our theology, in the way we live our lives, in our ethics, I think it prohibits capital punishment. When we kill a killer, we are lowering ourselves to that level. It's estimated that in the United States of America, now that genetic testing is available, and now that projects like the Innocence Project are operational and are really looking into the background and the cases of those who are currently housed on death rows throughout the United States, almost 1 in 10, some would say 1 in 9, but at least 10% of those on death row are innocent people. Now, that's a margin of error that's way too big for any civilized society to tolerate. We're going to kill all these innocent people so that we make sure we get the ones that are not innocent. And capital punishment takes away the whole teaching of the gospel that every human being is redeemable. Every human being can be rescued by God. Who are we to say that this person is incorrigible, that God can't change them, that their hearts can't be renewed? Especially when we recognize that to be angry with another person is essentially the beginning of murdering someone. So, yes, there are some very violent people, and society needs to be kept safe from those people. They need to be locked away someplace where they cannot harm the rest of us. I agree with that. But we don't have to execute them. We don't have to kill them. Another problem with capital punishment is that it disproportionately, vastly disproportionately applies to poor people, specifically African American poor people. If you're a young African American man from a poor neighborhood and you're accused of a capital crime in the United States, you can't afford a high-powered lawyer who's able to manipulate the system to get you off. The likelihood of you winding up on death row is extremely high. If you're a white person from the suburbs, the likelihood, and commit the same crime, the likelihood of you winding up on death row is extremely low. If you're a wealthy white person, the chances of you ever doing any jail time at all is extremely low. So it's an unjust system. It's a system which targets the poorest among us, the disenfranchised, the marginalized among us. It's a system which is often in error. It's a system that is brutal, that brutalizes society as well as the individual. Now, you say, well, what about victims' rights? Let's support the victims' families, and our hearts go out to them, and let's help them in every way we can and surround them with love. But we're not helping them by killing someone who killed their loved one. That's just two wrongs, and two wrongs, as my grandmother said, don't make a right. So there's some additional thoughts on Jesus' exhortation in Matthew chapter 5, that we who follow him give up the way of violence and death and hatred, and instead follow the way of life and love and forgiveness and peace.